Before we start our lesson this evening, let's go to God in prayer. Almighty Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your patience and your love and your mercy. We thank you that we could gather here to share your word. Father, I ask that you be with me as I present this word, and just, Father, help me to tell the truth. Help me to show your love for us as you've put it down in your word. I pray, Father, you be with the rest of us. Help our hearts to be open to this word, and help us just to fellowship together as we open your word. In Jesus' name, amen. So, I worked in advertising for many years, and I wrote thousands of commercials. So if this starts off sounding like a commercial, I come by it honestly. Do you feel down in your Christian walk? Do you feel weary, beaten up, tired, exhausted, and you look at the state of the world and your friends commenting on Facebook and you just want to pack it in? Well, I've got something for you. I've got something that I find really inspirational, and I decided to share it with you. A little history about this. This is the anniversary. This is the 80th anniversary of something that I just find really inspirational. And Zach, are you ready? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Queen of the Skies, the B-17 bomber. First went into service June 28th, 1935. That's when it had its maiden flight, and it was put into service during the Second World War. Now, you know me, I'm a Second World War buff, and I could go on and on about really cool inventions that came out of World War II. And this one's my favorite. And there's a lot of reasons why. This is back when there was no Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army, and it was called the Army Air Corps. And they decided there was a need for something that could drop a lot of bombs on bad people. This was in 1935. I think they were thinking this Hitler guy is over in Europe causing trouble. So they put together a call for bids and said, we need a plane that can go at a top speed of about 250 miles an hour, that can accurately drop bombs from about 10,000 feet with a range of 2,000 miles. And 3 different aircraft companies put in prototypes, and Boeing company put in the B-17. When they did, the designers equipped it to meet those criteria and a lot more. This had a crew of 10 people. 5 of them were dedicated machine gunners because this plane had 13 50 caliber machine guns on it. Its top speed was 280 miles an hour, cruising speed of about 180. It could carry between 4,000 and 8,000 pounds of bombs, top cruising altitude of about 36,000 feet. And if you really threw out unnecessary stuff and really crammed it, it could hold about 17,000 pounds of bombs. Pretty amazing plane. There were 12,700 of these made during World War II. And 4,700 of them, next slide, Zach, ended like this. 4,700 of them were shot down. That's 37%. That's like the crew of a B-17, when they went up in the air, they had a greater than 1 in 3 chance of not coming home. But that brings us to what is really amazing about this airplane. You see, the designers of this plane added something else to it. They gave this airplane the ability, with redundant systems and just the way it was designed, to take punishment. And I think maybe the Army Air Corps knew about this when they accepted the bid from Boeing, because when everyone showed up and they were having the field day and everyone was flying their prototype planes, the prototype B-17 crashed on landing in front of everybody who was looking to buy a new airplane for the Army Air Corps, and they still bought the B-17. But this is a kind of plane that was powered by 4 1,200 horsepower engines, but it could fly home and get there on just one engine if it had to. It wouldn't have been fast, it wouldn't have been pretty, but it could get home. And just to show you how much punishment this thing could take, I have some illustrations for you. This plane got home safely and brought its crew home safely with basically the nose shot off. If you look at it carefully, you can see the bombardier's seat out in the open, and you can see one of the machine guns hanging down by the wheel. Next, this one had a huge gaping hole in the side. You've heard of flak. Those are little explosive shells. They're kind of like bottle rockets that come up at the airplane and explode and send shrapnel and hopefully knock holes in the plane. Worst thing that could happen to a B-17 is the round would penetrate the skin of the plane and go off inside the plane. That's called a burst-in plane, and that's what this was. This shell went off inside the plane, and it still made it home safely. Next. This one is my favorite. This plane had a collision with a German fighter plane. And you know the expression, you should see the other guy? The other plane's wing ripped that hole in the side of the plane, and the tail assembly was loose. And the guy dropped out of formation and flew it home. People that saw the plane coming in said that that tail was wagging like a dog's tail as it came in. And it landed with all 10 crewmen safe, and when it came down, it broke in half, right at that slash. And the engineers who built the plane and came and looked at it said it would have held together, but when that enemy plane hit, it carried off the rear landing wheel of the airplane, which would have been just under the tail. And so the bottom of the plane dragged on the ground, and that's why it snapped off. They said if that wheel had been there, it would have landed. And a lot of these planes that came home damaged and brought their crews home safely were either recycled for parts or repaired and went back into service. And that's why I love this plane. The designer made it resilient and able to take an enormous amount of punishment. It's kind of like our designer has made us resilient and able to take a whole lot of punishment. But we don't always see that, because when we're in the process of coming home, which is what our lives are all about, we are having trouble seeing that finish line in the distance. And that passage that David just read about run the race with endurance and do this, or you hear Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And yet you're so battered by your life, and you start wondering, how do I do that? What does this look like? How does Christ give us the strength? How can we reach down and find these inner reserves of strength that our designer has put into us? And I still do this. And maybe I shouldn't admit this, but we have these little lunches, Char and I and David and Dennis, and the interns show up sometimes. Wednesday mornings, we meet at a Bob Evans, and we have lunch together, and we discuss church business. And I don't know, a month or 6 weeks ago, I was just sitting and listening to everyone that needed prayer, and everyone that had a situation, and just everything that was going on, and all the people we needed to talk to, and all these things we needed to keep the church running like clockwork, and we're trying to make disciples, and we're trying to build community, and just all this stuff. And for some reason, it was just weighing on me that day. And I didn't say anything to my buddies, but I sat there and I thought, am I really the best that God has to work with right now? For some reason, it just all kind of landed on my shoulders at once, and I had no idea how to deal with that. I just kind of hit that old wall of despair. Fortunately, I was teaching a prayer class on Wednesday night, so I had to stay in the Word, which is always a good thing to do when you're beaten up like that. And I had something I was preparing for the class, and I ended up saying, well, I'm supposed to be speaking. I like this so much. You're benefiting you're reaping the benefit of that. Found an answer to how you can survive that in Exodus, starting in chapter 3. So if you'll turn there, this is a story about Moses. This is the burning bush story. And you know the story up to then. He was a Hebrew baby, and at the time, the evil Pharaoh was dunking Hebrew babies in the river. So his mother put him in a little basket and set him off afloat, and he got picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter. And he was raised by one of the royal household. And he got to be 40 and killed a guy for beating up one of his brethren and fled into the desert. And at this point in the story, he's been wandering in the desert for 80 years. And there's one really important thing to remember about Moses, and this is something that I think you've heard me up before complaining about all these movies about Moses, how they just get so much of it wrong. And I've come to the conclusion that because these movies are wrong, the key thing they're doing is not that they're putting the 10 plagues out of order, or they're making the Pharaoh a nice guy, or they forget that Aaron even exists in the story of Moses and stuff like that. It's because they get Moses wrong. They try to put Moses up as some kind of a superhero. Now, for research for this part of my lesson, I consulted with 2 knowledgeable men about who the best superhero was, Superman or Batman. Okay? I was going to just pose that as a general question, but I figured I'd get a lot of blank stares, kind of like I'm getting now. So when I asked this question, Zach, what did you tell me? Who's the best superhero, Superman or Batman? Batman. Okay. Zach. Batman. Zach took longer to think of it. He's like, oh man, let me think about this. And do you remember what you said, why Batman was better? It was brilliant. I don't remember. He said, Superman is he's got superpowers. He goes, Batman's not really a superhero because he's just a regular guy with cool stuff. Okay? And that's what Moses is. Moses is a regular guy with cool stuff. Okay? And here's where he gets some cool stuff in this story, starting with verse 7. He goes and he finds a burning bush, and God says, do not come take off your sandals, this is holy ground. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses says to God, yeah, let's do this. No. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Let me pause there for a second. When I was studying this, I read a commentary, and I just totally disagreed with it, because the guy said, look, Moses is so humble that he is just turning this all over to God. And I'm like, no, he's not. Moses doesn't want to do this. Who am I? He might as well have said, am I the best God has right now to handle all this stuff at the Alliance Church of Christ? Okay? So, what does God do? Oh, you're right, I'll get your brother to do it, no problem. We'll check you later. No. God says, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. See, I don't think Moses served that 40 years in the wilderness just because he was in hiding for 40 years and he had to wait for people to die. That might have helped things along. And the people that remembered he killed the guy. But you got to remember, when you grow up in the household of Pharaoh, you grow up, your dad is the morning and the evening sun, and everything he says is infallible, and everything he says is law, and you're going to get a little bit of a head on you. I mean, even when Moses kills that guy, he hides a body and he thinks, oh, nobody's going to, my dad's morning and the evening sun. He's probably thinking he's not going to get caught, and that's not the way it works. So what better way for Moses to learn humility than to go tend to sheep for 40 years? That son probably baked the arrogance of the royal family right out of him over that stretch of years. And yet, he probably still retained all the knowledge he needed to be able to walk back into the court and know all the little ins and outs of Egyptian court procedure and stuff. So he was specifically put there in this moment to do this job, and God wasn't going to let him off the hook. And God said, I will be with you, and here's a sign for when you're successful. So God's even told him, this is how the story is going to end. You're going to come back, and you're going to worship me right here, and it's going to be great. So Moses said, okay, you convinced me. No. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for gold and silver jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So he's like, well, what do I tell them? And God is like, you tell them it's going to be fantastic. You tell them that I'm going to destroy this nation before your very eyes, and they're going to give you every last bit of pocket change they had to get rid of you, and you're going to be taken care of. God tells him how this is going to end. Sound familiar? It's kind of like us looking at the book of Revelation. We know how this is going to end. Keep that in your head. Then Moses said, okay, great plan. No. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it to the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. I love that line. Moses ran from it. Well, he grew up in Egypt. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he put it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some of the water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. So now God is equipping him and saying, I'm giving you power here, and you're going to do this job. And Moses is so excited about this, he says, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." God saying, don't worry, you're going to know what to say. I'm going to put the words right in your mouth. But he said, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with your mouth and with his mouth." See, he doesn't completely write Moses off. He says, I'm going to tell Aaron what to say, but you're going to know what to say too. And as you look at the story as it plays out, Aaron plays less and less a part when Moses goes in and talks to the Pharaoh. It says, "He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, just as you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you will do the signs." So you see this interplay between God and Moses, where God is not feeling up to the task. He's feeling inadequate. He's feeling beaten up and exiled. He says, "Who am I?" And God says, "I'm with you. Don't worry who you are. Worry about who I am." He says, "Who sent me?" And he said, "I am Jehovah God. I'm your designer. I'm your creator." He says, "They won't believe me." And so God gives them not one, not two, but 3 signs and tells them how the story is going to end. When he says, "Send someone else," God gets mad and says, "Okay, Aaron can do this, but you still have to go because you're the one I designed for this job." The upshot of all this is that our designer is not going to send us anywhere unprepared. I think as members of the church, we read these stories, and we read the stories of the great people in the Bible and go, "Oh, why couldn't I be like that guy? Why couldn't I have been like Moses and be a great leader?" Well, you know what? You can be better than Moses. You can. And because instead of making excuses, all you have to do is pray to be equipped when you're in a struggle. That's all it has to do. You probably are the best that God has to work with going into whatever situation or whatever struggle you're facing. You have to remember a few things. First of all, if you feel called to do something, then God has probably already equipped you or prepared you to do that to begin with. My son felt it in his heart he needed to go to China. Could you speak Chinese when you went to China? I would say, can you speak Chinese now? And you will a little bit. He speaks what's called survival Chinese. But he wasn't high and dry, and he found out that being an English speaker over there is a novelty. So he was already equipped going in. You have to also remember that God is the original out-of-the-box thinker, and that while you've got your little human blinkers on, God sees the picture that you can't. I mean, look at Joshua fighting the Battle of Jericho. Put yourself on the wall of Jericho, watching these Hebrew guys marching around the wall, blowing horns for 7 days, and laughing at them, thinking, nothing's going to come of this. But that's not how God saw it. You think of Gideon when he was fighting the Midianites. God thought so out of the box there that he set it up to where Gideon didn't suffer any casualties because the Midianites all killed each other. They were so frightened by what he had Gideon do. And then you have one of my favorites, in 2 Kings 7, when Ben-Hadad and the Syrians have surrounded the city of Samaria and they besieged it, and there's a huge, horrible famine. And this is that terrible, terrible story where the king of Israel is walking through the streets, and this woman comes up and says, "You have to help me." And he's like, "What's the problem, my child? I know things are tough. Have you seen the price of donkey heads down the street? It's really horrible." And she said, "I had a baby, and my friend had a baby, and we're starving." So we said, "Okay, we're going to have to eat our babies." So she said, "Okay, well, you eat your baby today, and we'll eat my baby tomorrow." And so we cooked my baby up and ate it, and we came to have dinner today, and she's hidden her baby. And the king of Israel tears his clothes, and it's horrible. Doesn't look like the siege is ever going to be lifted. And then you have some starving lepers outside the city gates, and they say, "Well, we could starve here and be rejects, or we could go into the Syrians' camp and get fed and still be rejects, but at least we'll be well fed." And they go into the Syrians' camp, and they're gone, because God had made them hear the sounds of a great approaching army, and He revealed that to the man of God, Elijah. And when the Syrians heard this, they just cleared out. So God arranged the victory in such a way that the Israelites didn't suffer any of the casualties, but then neither did the Syrians. They just left. And this is the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that God does. And finally, what does God tell us about those moments when we are beaten up? 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you because" what? "My power is made perfect in your weakness." So when we're in those weak moments, when we're beaten up, those are the moments that God's power is evident, even if we've been prepared, but we've got to steel ourselves and have resolve for that and know, like through the story of Moses, that we have been prepared for that eventuality. When you know that God has your back, and when you're in the moment of struggle and you keep your eyes on God, when you get a glimpse of the glory that you are bringing to God in that moment, it doesn't seem like it's such a struggle. And it all just kind of falls into perspective. Would you folks all say that I have been through a lot in the last year? Okay, yeah? And maybe if you stretch that to 3 years, you could really, maybe almost get an amen out of that. Okay, I can't say that because it doesn't feel like that to me. Because I have been in there and God has had my back in all of this, and I have just, anything good you have seen of me in the last 18 months to 3 years, give the credit for that to God, because I didn't know I could do all this. I didn't know I could get through everything I have been through. And I can't say in good conscience that I have been through a lot, because I come into this building several times a week, and I'm among people that I think have been through a lot worse than I have. I could just start naming people and think, well, these people went through this, and those people went through that, and there's this family, and they just have targets on their back. And when it's in that perspective, I just can't in good conscience stand up here and say, poor me, because I feel like God has used me as some kind of incredible instrument. I'm not sure quite what song it's playing, but it's there. Your designer has made you resilient. Your designer has made it so you can take and absorb a lot of punishment and get back up and keep running. And the designer is there waiting to cheer you on. And your designer will give you everything you need to get home.